country like Ethiopia, for example, would liberalize the banking sector, the mobile sector?
Before I go to your question, I want to respond to some of the points that have been raised. Now, the World Bank says that there is over $90 billion. There's a gap of over $90 billion in investment in infrastructure. There has been very little infrastructure investment in most of Africa for the past 30 years. There was infrastructure investment in the initial period of colonization, and it's very interesting that you are refurbishing the railway system that was built by the Brits before the Prime Minister was born. And then in the initial years of independence. Since 1980s, the gap in infrastructure investment has gone in the wrong direction. Why? Because since the 1980s, the policy has been the private sector does the infrastructure. Now, why do we need infrastructure? What's the point? We need infrastructure primarily because that's an essential input for manufacturing, for exploiting our natural resources, for agriculture, and so on and so forth. Now, in manufacturing, public sector doesn't have much of a say. In agriculture, the public sector does not have much of a say. In mining, same thing. So enabling the private sector through public investment in infrastructure is not something that Africa is going to discover. If it tries to, it will simply be reinventing the wheel. That's what happened everywhere else. Second point I want to make. When I say much of infrastructure investment in Africa, not all, but much, will have to be public, that doesn't exclude, for example, in the case of a railway, implementation of the project will probably be done by some multinational company. The wagons and locomotives will naturally be manufactured by somebody else, another private sector. The management of the railway system itself might be done by a private company. But the ownership and the risk capital of that railway system, if it comes from the private sector, it will have a number of risks. First, all of you are saying the public sector has to de-risk. In other words, you are saying the public sector shoulders the risks and the private sector reaps the benefits. That's not going to work. Second, your discount rate is understandably high. You want to have a profit rate of what? 20%? The average profit rate in Africa that people expect is about 30%. With a discount rate of 30%, imagine how much infrastructure we will be able to do and how much of the gap we are going to fill. So the idea should not be that the public sector should be out, private sector should be in. We have to do, each one of us have to do what our comparative advantage seems to suggest. Now, the public sector does not have money. And that is limiting investment in infrastructure. But you know, these whiz kids in the financial system, I'm sure they can create instruments. The Prime Minister created one instrument. It's called the IFF. The idea was that he would commit to pay a certain amount of money for, say, 30 years for development aid. And the banks would use that as collateral and give us the money now. Simple idea. Financial engineering. Same type of financial engineering can be made. GM has a big multinational financial institution. This talk about deleveraging and all the rest, there's trillions of dollars of money that does not know what to do. And because it does not know what to do, it's going from one commodity to another commodity and becoming a wrecking ball. Today it's oil, tomorrow it's wheat, the day after tomorrow it's some other paper. We want this capital here to do something tangible. And there's a risk here. And the risk, Don's institution is AAA rated. Mine is junk. So if Don could raise the money and lend it to me, They now have the money to invest. And the private sector can come in implementation, can come in manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Now, two issues you raised, telecommunications and finance. We have not liberalized the financial sector in the sense that we have not allowed foreign banks to operate in Ethiopia. Why? Because these giants, Chiam, manage an economy that's many times bigger than mine. These giants can wreck a giant economy such as that of the United Kingdom. Ours is a flimsy boat. They come in, they use instruments that we cannot control, that in most instances we don't even understand. The best of us don't even understand. How are we going to regulate them? How are we going to regulate these people? It's not possible. We don't have the capacity now. So what did we do? We allow the private sector in Ethiopia, which is not infinitely more complex than the public sector, and therefore could easily be monitored and regulated by the public sector. We allow the private banks to operate here, so we have more than 10 private banks here, but not foreign banks. Is this going to be the permanent feature? No. As we grow, as we develop, and as we become more sophisticated in our regulatory capacity, of course we'll liberalize, but not now. And we have lost nothing because of this policy. Telecommunications. Ethiopia, as a country, I think in per capita terms, is investing more in infrastructure than perhaps any other country in Africa, whether it's railways or power or telecommunication. We're doing it by borrowing from banks that are not that good at speculation, mostly Chinese banks. So we have the money, borrowing it, and we want telecommunication in every school, in every village, and we want it cheap, not at 30% discount rate, at 2%, 3% discount rate. That is why we have not yet opened up the telecommunication sector to private investment. Is that going to be the permanent future? No. Once the market failure there is overcome, we move out. There were times when we owned breweries in this country. Now we are privatizing all of our breweries because that's not our business. The private sector can do an excellent job. We used to own, and we still own some textiles. The only textile factories we own are the ones that we could not privatize because they're not making profit. But we want to privatize this. So it's not, our policy is not designed to keep the private sector at bay. We know that's a dead end. Without the private sector, there is no development. What our policy is based on is make sure that the public sector plays its role so that we will have Asia-type growth. What do I mean by Asia-type growth? Fast, but not just fast, equitable. Both fast and equitable growth. You cannot have fast and equitable growth without a clear division of labor and partnership between the private sector and the public sector.
I feel like I'm